Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar, An Introduction to Arts Journalism with Disability Arts Online in partnership with The Skinny and also Creative Scotland. My name's Joe Turnbull. I'm a white man in my 30s. I've got curly hair and a beard. And I'm the Digital Operations Manager at Disability Arts Online.
Hi, thanks, Joe, and welcome to everyone. I'm Colin Hambrook. I'm an older white man wearing glasses with short greying hair, and I'm the founding editor of Disability Arts Online, and which was set up in 20 years ago to be a platform for disabled artists and for sharing work about disability arts. Thank you.
I'm also quickly seeing who I am. I am Titi Leo. I have joined the project as a freelance writer and journalist. I am a light-skinned Black person, and I'm wearing a blue jumper and a red and white kufiyeh over that. And I'm looking forward to today's seminar.
Thanks, Titi. Thanks, Colin. Just a couple of other things. Obviously, today's session is relaxed. Feel free to come and go as you please. Get up, move around. You know, we're not really looking at you guys. We would ask you to stay muted and probably videos off, except for bits where there's questions, just for the cleanness of the recording. Yeah, so that's that. And we will have a designated break at around 10 to 3. And just to say, Ros from The Skinny will be joining us from 3. So if you're wondering why she's not around at the minute, she'll be joining us from 3 to chat about some stuff to do with The Skinny. So I'm just going to really quickly pop some slides up and we'll just quickly have a very quick look at today's agenda. So we're on this bit here, we're doing housekeeping and speaker introductions, which we're nicely on time with. Until about 10 past. Hopefully we can claw back a bit of time actually there. We'll spend about 20 minutes talking about arts journalism in 2024. We'll have a bit of discussion around what makes a good piece of arts journalism. Have a short 10-minute break. Ros is then going to join us to talk about what editors are looking for. She'll talk specifically about some of the Skinny's priorities and what they look for. And Colin will also do the same from a Disability Arts Online perspective. And then we'll have a section on pitching, describing what a pitch is and giving you some tips on how to pitch. We'll have a final bit for questions at the end, just to say there will be opportunity to ask questions kind of at the end of each of those broad sections as well. So like I say, plenty of time to get your questions in. But if you think of something in the meantime, do please just use the chat for those, and we'll keep an eye on that stuff. Yeah, so I think without further ado, we'll just dive straight in. I've got a list of 4 publications there: Galdem, BuzzFeed, Vice, and the London Evening Standard. I'm going to put a quick poll out now, and I'd like you to all indulge us and see if you can tell us what those 4 publications have in common. The answer is, unfortunately, that they've all either gone bust or had a major restructure pretty much in the last 12 months. Galdem was actually due to be a partner on the last iteration of Diverse Critics. We were really excited about that. We thought they're one of the most forward-looking, innovative publications, focusing on BPOC, female perspectives, female and non-binary perspectives. BuzzFeed, obviously, one of the earliest movers in terms of that new journalism that's sort of centered around internet culture. Vice, I always thought, were one of the good left of field things. London Evening Standard's been going for over 100 years. They haven't gone bust, but they've completely restructured, so they're no longer a daily paper. They're only doing online, and yeah, and weekly now. But so all of those have kind of either gone or had to undergo a major restructure. That's from like your legacy media to even at the very bleeding edge. And the reason that there's a big icon of an elephant there is really about, we thought we'd start the session with the elephant in the room, and the elephant in the room for anything that's about arts journalism in 2024 really is that it's a tough old world out there. It's really difficult for even the most forward-looking, dynamic publications, or up to the ones that have got really deep pockets. It's just a difficult market. It's a difficult place to survive. So being an arts journalist in that arena, certainly not an easy thing, but hopefully we'll talk a bit more about why we still think it's really valuable. But just to give a little bit more context on this before we kind of move on, I've got a quote here, which is from Michelle Stanistreet, who's the NUJ General Secretary, who are the Union, National Union of Journalists in the UK. And the quote is, "Right now, the pressures on journalism and journalists are at their most grave at a time when we need quality, trusted information and news more than ever. Yet levels in public trust are impaired. Frontline news resources have been hollowed out in many media outlets after successive cutbacks. Levels of deliberate engagement in mis and disinformation by a range of actors are unparalleled. A combination that has been turbocharged by the rapid deployment of generative AI. On top of this, journalists have also been contending with significant additional pressures in the form of rising rates of harassment, intimidation, and threats. It makes quite the perfect storm." That was in a recent report that they put out about the state of journalism. So not particularly rosy, but I think it sums up some of the major sort of barriers and issues that are facing journalism more broadly in that quote. That's just journalism broadly. Arts journalism, you can kind of you can almost amp up anything that journalism as a broader thing is going through in terms of what arts journalism is going through at the minute. It's even less well funded than the rest of the journalism sector. Basically, staff writing positions in arts don't really exist anymore. There's very few, even major publications don't have staff writers within the arts. Some barely even, like they actually pared back their coverage of the arts, even sort of mainstream newspapers and things like that. Just that they're pretty much covering just the mainstream stuff, like Hollywood, and kind of stripping back all that coverage of the interesting stuff that goes on around the margins. Freelance fees are really quite low generally. It's not always clear like what rates publications pay. That like lots of very trusted and major publications don't publish their rates of pay. They don't, they're not publicly available. That becomes an interesting negotiation, even if you do get to the point of writing for those. And then sort of tied to that, making it a bit of a perfect storm, but the arts sector, not just arts journalism, is also, I'm sure we're all aware, in a pretty sorry state. What's going on in the Scottish landscape at the minute's unfortunate. But just to give you the context, like UK arts funding per capita, so like per head, is pretty much lower than any other nation in Europe, which is ridiculous, really, considering it's always touted as one of the UK's biggest strengths. Yet we just don't fund it properly. And the UK, so just to back that up, the UK cut its culture budget by 6% between 2010 and 2022, while places like Germany increased its budget by 22%, France by 25%, and Finland by a whopping 70%. So it could all be a bit more Finnish when it comes to art funding. I think that would be good. And then underpinning a lot of that is that GCSE and A-level entries in art subjects have really dropped. I think all know a lot of the reasons for that. Very political. And then tying into all that, and something that's obviously close to our hearts and close to the program that we're involved in, is that there's a huge lack of diversity across the industry, across the arts and within arts journalism. That's partly because, only people from pretty privileged backgrounds can kind of afford to go into the arts and have careers there, be supported, because the structures of support just aren't really there. And that's a real problem, because then we're living in a monoculture where only one type, only certain types of people get to tell the stories and do the critical reflection on the culture. So yeah, lots to not be positive about. It might seem really strange for this particular topic for us to start on a downer like that. So I don't want us to all leave the session feeling down about it. There's still lots of great reasons to do it, and there's still out there people carrying the torch of it and trying to do some of that stuff. But it just didn't feel right to kind of lead you up a garden path to this idea that a career in arts journalism is an easy street, really. Colin, I'll hand on to you going into this next slide. But so the big question being, why would you consider it in 2024?
Thanks, Joe. I think we're all agreed that we really firmly need the arts. The arts are in many respects, what gives the thing that gives us a reflective tool on the society that we're living in, and writing about the arts is the muscle really for that tool. It arts writing helps make better art, and it's really important for artists that reflection is that critique is out there in the world. I think the reason why I set Disability Arts Online up 20 years ago was because none of the media were writing about disabled artists at all, and you need to have your work written about in order to then apply for opportunities for funding to make further work. So it seemed there was a space missing in the arts landscape, and that Disability Arts Online has been helping to fill that gap over the last 20 years. We need art criticism also to help understand the impact of art, how art changes society, and it's really important from the perspective of the way the diversity within society, and challenging stereotypes around all kinds of stereotypes that impact on our identities as human beings, especially those of us who come from marginalized backgrounds. Art helps to create a conversation that creates understanding, and it has an educational element to it. I think also developing arts critical skills is really important from a sort of portfolio perspective. It's an important muscle to be able to put on your CV. I know that for me personally, I think better when I'm writing. I find arts writing helps me to know what I think about a piece of work, and helps me reflect, and so I think it's also good from an artist's perspective to develop those skills in order to be able to understand what your own work is about in a fuller and wider perspective. It helps to hone your writing skills, and that's really valuable for formulating briefs, for applying for projects, for funding, etc. Yeah, Titi, would you like to jump in?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's so hard because I think it's interesting because obviously the arts and journalism about the arts is so crucial and vital, um both for like what you said, like the skills that we develop and are able to shape and like deepen because we engage with it, but also because it's so necessary. Like, how are artists going to communicate and share their work if there's nobody sharing and bringing that work out to audiences and showing us that it exists? And I guess like the things that are most precarious are often the things most needed. And I'm thinking about like, especially like in conflicts and as we see like genocide, or think people are still reading poetry, people are still reaching out to each other and connecting and expressing kind of the human experience through art. So I think even though, yeah, so I guess we almost, even though it's becoming harder and harder for all of us, we also need to hold on harder and harder and more daily, because it's not gonna, the world is not gonna become a better place with the arts not being in it, or journalism not existing and not representing us and our voices. So yeah, I guess it was maybe never a career that people went in for the money, but maybe today it's a career. It's like a question of how can I finance myself or pay for my rent and all that, those kind of things, and also have my creative practice and also keep my journalism going. Um, so that's how I breach it, or that's how I look at it um, these days, or maybe generally.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something not to get into if you're not passionate about it. Basically, it's yeah, it's it's not one for the money. It's not one, and I don't think getting into it just for the free tickets is a great idea either. But you can. That's one tiny perk of it, that you can often get free tickets to things, even if you're not getting paid. But then you might at least get free ticket to review a show. Which, if it's something you are passionate about, then that's kind of that's how I started. I didn't really introduce myself at the top, but other than my role and things. But yeah, I started. Um, I'd always wanted to be a journalist, and I got into it sort of by arts journalism, kind of by accident, because I didn't study art or an art subject. I was just I was in a period of my life where I was going and seeing lots of art and engaging with lots of culture, and because I've always had a passion for writing, I ended up just going, oh, why don't I kind of do this? It was a hobby. It was not. So I wasn't really seeing it as a career at the time. But I was doing it for free and with sort of smaller publications, and just got to doing it more and more, and you kind of get more practice at it and things. And I had about probably 3 years of being a freelance journalist as being like my main thing. I was obviously doing other hustles on the side, um, but it was kind of the main thing that I was doing career wise. And then from that, I ended up joining Disability Arts Online because it was something I was kind of passionate about, with furthering other people's journalistic careers, and yeah, bringing other voices through, I suppose. But yeah, I think the key message for me would be, yeah, do it if you're passionate about it, and you get something from that. Of course, we've got to pay the bills, so we have to be aware of that. I wouldn't say that I'm not an advocate for people having to work for free at all, but especially if you're early on in your journey, sometimes it is worth putting in those yards off your own back. Where you're not getting paid directly, but it kind of can lead to stuff. And as Colin said, it really, you learn a certain tool set, a skill set and tools that you can use elsewhere. So yeah, hopefully you're not all running for the hills just yet. And we've kind of convinced you of some of the value of it in this day and age. And TT, we're going to talk a little bit about what we think makes a good piece of arts journalism.
So excitingly, we're coming to a more interactive bit, so do feel free to unmute or say it out loud, or I guess like put it in the chat. But what do you think makes a good piece of arts journalism? I'm gonna give us maybe 5 minutes to just like put things into the chat or get ready to like voice a response if you would like to, and we can just brainstorm together.
Yeah, so a couple of minutes to have a think. If you would like to voice what you're going to say, then if you could use the raise hand function, that's going to be easiest, and we'll come to you. Otherwise, yeah, as TT says, feel free to just pop it in the chat.
And I guess that could also be like maybe specific things about an article that you've read that you enjoyed, or kind of like general elements that you find important, or maybe more just about a specific approach, or maybe the writer got paid, or like anything that you can think of that kind of contributes to making a good piece.
No one wants to be first, do they?
Oh, there's good people time. Oh yeah, put the question in the chat. So the question is, what makes a good piece of arts journalism? I'm gonna type it again. And I think maybe what we can do, if everybody's shy, we'll introduce the waterfall method. So I'll ask everyone to get ready to type their answer to the question. And I guess it doesn't have to be like a long, oh, there's answers coming. It doesn't have to be an elaborate da 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 da, but inviting everyone to answer the question, what makes a good piece of arts journalism? I can't spell and speak at the same time.
For Rebecca, if text is more accessible, just remember as well, we do have the captions available as well if you'd like to sort of see along with the words, although TT is obviously putting the question in the chat.
Yes, I've put the question in the chat. So please feel free to answer in the chat or raise your hand and let us know. I'm not looking for formulated theories and textbook answers. I'm just looking for first things that pop into your head. So I appreciate that. It's a bit daunting. We've got someone here who said engaging, using accessible language so people not in the art world still have something to gain from reading a piece of writing. And I think that's a really good point. So making it accessible, who can understand what it's being talked about, that's really important. And then someone else says probably a clear writing that accurately and impartially conveys information or engages readers emotionally and intellectually. Yeah. So being able to like take something away, feeling engaged, what is actually like what grabs you, what makes it interesting, what like stimulates and brings more ideas and thoughts. Maybe an article stays with you for a long time. That is a really, really good sign of like a good piece of journalism. If someone like remembers a week later, it's like, oh yeah, I read this article and I'm still thinking about it. But also being impartial. I guess like impartiality is something that is interesting because I guess within like journalism and like the theories of like what traditional journalism is hones in on is very much like we need to be impartial, we need to have an objective view, but especially from an anti-racist perspective, it's really important to actually acknowledge that maybe that impartiality or objectivity doesn't really exist, and it's maybe really important to, or it's maybe much more important to um, ex- um, disclaim your position and where you're coming from and what informs the experience and the perspectives that you're taking in the article. Um, but I guess these are like different perspectives, and so it's not a wrong answer to say it needs to be objective and impartial. It's more just about like what your philosophy behind writing and journalism is, and which paper and where you're publishing, because there's different people with different values. So that's a really important point and to think to reflect about in your practice, maybe as a journalist. We also have, I enjoy intersectional pieces of arts journalism. I feel like I learn the most from these pieces and enjoy them the most. Thank you. That's a really good observation. So like thinking about like how different things influence each other and being more holistic in the approach and like what they convey is really important and really engaging. So I really appreciate that idea. We also have the first couple of paragraphs draw you in because attention spans are short and lots of folks are reading online where they can easily switch to reading something else. That's actually crucial and really sad and unfair, because I think it's, as the writers, we're like, oh no, there's so many more bits to the story, but it's very likely that a significant percentage of your readers are just going to read the first paragraph, and if you're lucky, they're going to read more. So it's almost about like how much information do I put in, what is the most important thing to convey, and being really aware of that and writing towards that is crucial and going to make you a really good journalist and writer, because you're aware of your audience and how they engage in this work. And we also have, I prefer humor and personality in arts journalism rather than colder and more impartial tone. So that's a really good point. In arts journalism, there's this kind of flexibility maybe around it to be more creative and a bit more different than like a standard news piece. So you can really play around with that and explore what is your voice and how you want to sound, and maybe you become recognizable in the way that you breach topics and explain things, and that could really like enhance your writing and your work and your career as well. These are amazing. How are we for time? I'm like getting really excited.
We're doing great for time. We've got loads of time.
We've got loads of time. Okay, that's amazing. So
So we can take a bit of time.
Um,
So yeah, keep them coming, everyone. Let me know if you do want me to put the slide back up, TT. But I
yeah,
think
so
it's good to give people another couple of minutes if they want to
yeah,
send any more.
we have more time, so keep them coming. Also, if you want to respond to each other or say like, oh yeah, this is a really good point, because, or thanks for saying, that kind of stuff can also happen here. It doesn't only have to be like me picking up your points, but I'm very happy to do that. But yeah, it's really exciting to get this like broad reflections on what makes a good arts journalistic piece, because in this way, like we can also learn from each other and see, oh, this is what interests this person. That this maybe not the type of writing that I love, but it kind of like inspires more ideas, or you can learn about the different things that exist. So I guess it's really important to realize that there's so many
Yeah.
different forms of writing.
I think the one about the first couple of paragraphs is interesting. There's like, even before that, like your title, it's kind of, again, like you want something that's going to hook someone in. So it's a really important one to highlight. Is like you need something that's going to pull people in. Unfortunately, with the way things work, you might write a great title and the editor might change it. That is like, titles are likely to be just to be clear, titles are likely to be changed. Having said that, as an editor, I try not to, especially if my writers clearly put a lot of effort into writing a really great a really great title, and I will try not to mess with it. But yeah, it's a really good point. You've got to pull people in quite early on. Having said that, there is also a technique called delayed drop, which is where you kind of you might drop a reader into a place where they kind of feel a bit unfamiliar or kind of out of their depth, don't know what's going on. You're basically dropping them into an unusual situation. And that in itself can be quite intriguing. And then you might be like that for about a paragraph, where people kind of don't really know where it's going, and then you hit them with kind of what the point of the article is. So yeah, there's different ways to do that, isn't there? There's different ways to make an engaging opening.
Yeah.
Mm.
Colin, do you have any bits that you want to add? What makes a good piece of art journalism from your perspective?
I, well, titles and stand first are the things that people most forget, or put the least amount of time into. And actually, in some respects, because they're the things that you first pick up on, so that they are very, very important to focus on. And yeah, it's always good to have a go at coming up with a title. It's very hard, because to think about, you have to, because you have to also think about the amount of space that the journal that you're pitching to has in order to accommodate titles. So it's about the length of it, and sometimes you have to think about trying to say something really pithy in maybe 10 words, which can be quite a challenge. Um, um, I always think that that referencing other pieces of art is a really good thing to do. That creating that sort of, even if it's a review rather than a comment piece or an interview piece, if there's something that strikes you, as a way in which the work sort of sets some kind of precedent, that's always very engaging. And I do like it when it's a kind of careful balance, but when the reviewer puts themselves into the work, so you get that sense of personality. um it can be a tricky balance, and it has to be for a good reason. But I quite like that.
Thank you. These are really helpful and interesting. We also have this person who has a wonderful title with many numbers. Say, I like writing that doesn't answer every question and instead asks questions that I don't know the answers to. It leaves me thinking about the piece of writing for longer. So I think that is a really good point, because it's almost this kind of how much can you convey in an article, and what questions are you going to leave open, what are you going to leave open for interpretation for the reader to kind of make their own opinion up on and like decide about. And I guess maybe how can you, maybe people, especially if you ask interesting questions, people will also look out for you again to like find maybe you have more answers, or maybe you found more perspectives on that kind of whatever you're raising or not answering, so yeah, I really like those reflections. Thank you.
That's a nice one. The Collins one is definitely controversial about putting themselves in it. I think putting a bit of your personality in it for sure, like definitely. I agree. It should come across, you should have your own voice. And that doesn't mean, so some writers approach that where they kind of got a brand, like they do the same sort of thing um, over and over, like in different contexts, but that you kind of know what you're going to get, and other people kind of play the field, and they'll try and be funny they'll do sort of humor for one piece, but for other pieces it's more, it needs a more serious tone because that reflects the work. So yeah, there's kind of two ways of approaching that, and I do think, but whichever of those you choose, I do think it needs to be your voice. To be sort of, even if you're playing a character, it wants to be a voice, a unique voice that comes through. And I think putting your own experience in it, definitely, if it's relevant to the piece, or it's like spoken to you for a particular reason, all those kind of things, that can really enhance a piece of writing. And I think that kind of reflects the way that that writing generally has been going. I think 20 years ago, if you were to do that, that would be seen as a very odd thing to do. You know, that it was much more this focus on sort of step back, that idea of impartiality, which we've already kind of dug into, and that, you know, I think writing has much more evolved into, you know, it's okay to bring the personal. Um, at the same time, I don't really want to hear if like there was someone making noise behind you in the theater, or if your bus was late and it meant you arrived to the theater late, so you were all stressed out when you got there or something like that. Like, we don't need, I don't need those kind of banal details unless there's a really, really good reason. Which, you know, like anything like that, of course, any of these things you can turn on their heads if you if you can play with the convention enough to do it. Then yeah, I implore you to do so. If you can make that interesting, but otherwise, like, people do fall into that trap sometimes, especially earlier in their careers, of like treating it a bit like a personal blog, where it's too much of that, too much of the you, and not enough of the whatever the other thing you're responding to is. So it's like anything, I think it's striking a bit of a healthy balance
Yeah,
with stuff.
I think where there's kind of where the writer kind of goes an extra mile in being honest. I think that really appeals to me. That kind of sensible, when that kind of authenticity of experience comes across in the writing.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. Me, a technique I really like is where you draw parallels to other things, and they could be way outside of that thing. You know, obviously, if you're really, really knowledgeable about, say, theatre, and you want to draw a comparison to another piece of theatre that it reminds you of, then especially if it's well known, then that's like an easy shortcut to other people who are, you know things about theatre, to kind of go, okay, it's like this, or it's completely different to that because of this thing. But that's quite a kind of standard way of drawing comparison like that. But actually, I quite like stuff that's even like a bit more left field than that, and like might compare a piece of theatre to, I don't know, a Nietzsche quote, or like, I mean, not that, because that's a bit trite in itself, but like just brings something completely different, like an aspect of philosophy, or yeah, something else that's just way out there, but that kind of situates it in some way, or just draws it, brings, it's like, the thing about that is that probably no other writer will think to do the same thing, and so it kind of gives that piece of writing a unique thing that's just, it's purely about you and your knowledge and experience, and it's kind of bringing a bit of yourself to it, but without it actually being about you, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Mm.
I think it's so interesting because it's really unfair, because you can do anything unless unless you, like, if you do it well. But if you don't do it well, like all of these like a bit out there things are gonna be rejected instantly. And like so I think my tip is to, if you have, especially if you have like ideas or expertise like that, that makes you really unique, because traditionally people are not writing like that or about these things. Really practice and like play around and get other people to maybe read and feedback on things before you approach someone who you, I guess, like have only one chance with. Because I guess like if in this industry, and it's quite small, if you like get your favorite editor and they read like a piece that they wouldn't like and reject it, because you use a really out there approach, that if you had finessed it a bit more would have like you know made this really outstanding impact, and you would have your way in. It would be better to just like practice amongst friends or people that you know, that can give you like gentle hinges of like, I like this idea and where you're going, but actually you were rambling on for like 5 paragraphs and you need to shorten that, or like what about that 10-word rule, and that kind of stuff before you go out there, because I'm very sure that all of you have these amazing unique ideas, but that you just need to like practice how to like get them out there. So, and it's really unfair, because like I guess how to get that experience when you're still like looking out and finding opportunities and that kind of stuff. But it's really about having a writing practice and continuing to try out different things. And then when you're ready, like getting it out there and actually persisting and knowing that there will be an audience for you and there will be people who will enjoy what you write and what you have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Great advice, TT. I think, like I alluded, like I said earlier, in terms of how I got into arts journalism, I just started writing about the things I was already doing and engaging with. And so it didn't feel like, I wasn't putting myself in a position where I was spending lots of time going to something that I wouldn't already do. It was like I was writing about stuff I was already doing. And that was like a really quick way of getting practice, basically. And to be fair, the first 10 times I did that, I didn't even, I didn't share it, but it wasn't shared publicly necessarily. It was kind of for me, and I might have sent it to a trusted friend or got a partner to look at it or whatever. But yeah, it is like anything. It's a kind of a muscle and a skill that you need to exercise. But yeah, those things that are a bit more out there, totally, you'll need to craft them. You'll need to refine them. I will bring up the slide that had a few other sort of pre-made suggestions in a minute. We've got about another 5 minutes on this. But yeah, I mean, I think structure is a big one. And again, you can play with structure. Bear with me while I just get to the right slide. That's reset. Here's a load of other things that we whacked onto a board of things that, and I've just said one of them there, well structured. But yeah, it doesn't have to follow this, but most forms of writing have some form of beginning, middle, and end. Now you can put the end at the beginning, the thing that you would normally expect to be at the end, that's fine. But like it needs that some sort of flow of the structure is definitely an important one. Well researched, we haven't really talked about that. That can be lots of different things, but if you're going to see, or let's say you're reviewing an album by a band, like definitely worth listening to their back catalogue, because like if you're doing that in a vacuum, I mean, there's value in coming to it as a fresh pair of ears, as it were, in that sense. But also, I think listening to the back catalogue, then you can go, yeah, it's nothing like they've ever done before, or yeah, no, they're ploughing the same furrow, those kind of things. That's research. You might also do, but the other kinds of research you might have, like if it's a theatre show that's about a particular social issue, then a bit of reading around that is probably worth doing as well. You're going to kind of just come to that piece of work much more informed. Yeah, but I think at least a bit of cursory research on the artist or the company or whatever it is that you're doing is worthwhile. I think all kinds of writing should be informed by good research, really, to some level.
I think, sorry, the most important part about research, I think, is after you've done all of that and like, really got the context in your head, you have to not put all of that in the article. And it's really annoying that you can't show off all the hours of work that you've done. But you clearly need to almost just, like it's maybe 2 sentences or like 5, but like obviously it's depending on how long your piece is in general, but it's only the tip of the iceberg that actually appears in the written submission in the end. And I think that's maybe like a harsh reality to get used to, but it will pay off. Like it is important to do the research, but it's also important to not show off, I guess, in the piece itself. Or I guess in these like minimal ways where it's like, oh, one word, or like, oh, I knew the context, or I knew the other person to interview, or I knew this other arts this other theater to mention, or this other like artist to mention that is in connection to them, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, like novelists do so much research that you don't necessarily see. I know this is obviously on a much smaller scale than that, but it's the same sort of concept, isn't it? Colin, did you have something you wanted to say?
I was just thinking that the one place where showing research is important is in your pitch. When you're pitching for to an editor to write a specific piece, it has to be quite pithy. Yeah, we're going on to
We'll
that.
come to that. We'll come to pitching.
Yeah.
And we're very close to coming to a break. I wonder if there's any others that are on here that we haven't really touched on. We haven't really spoke about critical engagement, which is a hard one to pin down and define. But I guess what we mean by that is, responding to the work critically, but that doesn't necessarily mean criticizing, like not saying it's bad or it's good, but just coming and kind of taking position and basically being considered, actually thinking about the work. Like the thing that you hear trotted out a lot these days is that because of the way that funding is for arts journalism and things like that, like the amount of times I heard when I'd written about a piece, artists saying to me, "Oh, you're the first writer who's written about it who hasn't basically just regurgitated the press release and added a few more little factual bits." But unfortunately, a lot of the stuff that is out there, because of pressures of time and things like that, I will imagine it's getting even more like that with kind of AI responses to stuff. Um, it's just like it's a shallow engagement with the work. It's like it's just repeating what they've said about it themselves in slightly different way, or it's just talking about the kind of basics of the who, what, where, and why of the thing. When really you wanting something that kind of digs a little bit deeper and is just considered, I think is mostly what we mean by critical engagement. But yeah, I think most of the others we've touched on in some way. Timely is an interesting one. That's definitely one to pick up on when we come to talk about pitching. But we're at 10 to, so we're kind of into break time. So if we come back at 3, and hopefully Roz from the Skinny will be joining us to chat a bit about the Skinny and their priorities and what they're looking for, and we'll be hearing as well from Colin about the same for Disability Arts Online, and we'll be talking about pitching as well. So we're going to hear from Roz from the Skinny now, who's going to talk to us a bit about what the Skinny does and what their priorities are and what they look for in terms of pieces of arts journalism. Yeah, I guess without further ado, Roz, I'll hand over to you if that's fine, and I might disappear out shot for a little bit while you do that, just for screen space.
I think I've got it in a weird view. Put it in speaker view. Hi, I am Roz. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Skinny magazine. And we've been working with Disability Arts Online on this scheme. This is the 3rd year, I think, right? 3rd year? Well,
Yeah.
3rd year because it started pre-pandemic. So
Yeah.
for quite some time. Navigating through the troubled waters of pandemic and whatever is going on with Creative Scotland at any one time. So the Skinny magazine, if you guys aren't familiar with it, we're a free sheet based in Edinburgh. We cover Glasgow, Edinburgh, and Dundee, and sometimes other areas. So we're not limited by geography. So we'll cover things that happen in Perth, for example, or the Venice Film Festival. It's very much to do with what's interesting, what people want to write about. There's a kind of link to Scotland, which we try to have. So if we were covering Venice Film Festival, potentially it would be because there's a Scottish film shown there, or because the films being shown there will later come to Scotland. So it has to have a kind of like relevance for this local audience. So we're free, we're monthly, we're distributed in sort of cultural venues, social venues, pubs, libraries, cinemas, galleries, that kind of thing. The idea is that it's something that people can either actively seek out or happen upon, to kind of introduce people to the broader culture. and help them to engage with their surroundings. I think it's like the kind of really key thing for me is making sure people have access to the information they need to go and see an exhibition or go to a gig or understand who it is they might be interested in, and just really kind of connect audiences to events and releases and so on. We have a print magazine. I'll just send a link to our issue where you can actually see the virtual version of the print magazine. So I can find the chat. So that's the skinny. So everything in print is also replicated online on the website, which you've already got a link to, and then also through social networks, primarily Instagram these days, because obviously Twitter's terrible and Facebook is Facebook. We haven't quite branched into TikTok as yet. We're based in Scotland. We have an international awareness, as I said. We want to platform the best of local talents and align it with comparable work on the international stage. We have a kind of focus on emergent talent and grassroots. We aim to contribute to fostering the creative scene in Scotland. I think it's very important, particularly on days like today when we've heard about issues with funding. I think our position within the ecosystem is something we've started to consider a lot more in recent years. What purpose does reviewing and writing about art actually serve? You know, it's for the readers, but it's also for the artists. It's also for kind of everyone involved to a degree, because when people are making those funding decisions, a lot of the time the evidentiary base that they're presented with will be writing in publications like ours. So it's all part of a broader context. I think it's important to consider. So we make the skinny. We also make a bunch of other publications. I'm going to send you links to now. So we've got Gnaw. Well, it's currently called Gnaw. We might be changing the name of it because we've come across some copyright issues with a chocolate brand called Gnaw. So that's our new food magazine. So it is kind of like long form food journalism, but then also linked to place, covering. So it's kind of, it's in two parts. So you've got the front part is kind of long form features about either things to do with actual food, things to do with identity, things to do with like food, culinary history, that kind of thing. And then at the back, you've got actual places that you can go that are kind of thematically linked to it, which is quite nice. So this actually has expanded beyond our traditional locations, and it goes to like the north of Scotland. It goes to like visitor centres in Stornoway, I think maybe it was, definitely went to Oban, and Inverness and St Andrews and places like that. So that's been quite a nice Scotland-wide adventure with that. We have something like that. We do an Edinburgh guide every year. Send you through the issue for that. And we also make Fest magazine, which is Edinburgh festivals focused. And we also do an edition in Adelaide, which comes out in February, March, so all the way in Australia. So that's just some context around the kind of different places that the different products we create, and also the different kind of contexts which we're working within. So there's the skinny, which is overtly Scottish culture, and then we've also got this kind of food focus, and then we've also got the Edinburgh City Guide, which is more kind of tourism focused and a bit more of a kind of commercially sort of vibe, and then Fest is very the Edinburgh Festivals focus. So there's a lot of different places where your writing could potentially have a home if you feel like you're like more kind of food focused, more like hospitality focused or something. There might be something in that, or if you're really interested in like stuff to do with identity, maybe Know's the place for that. No, title TBC. Maybe still not, who knows? That's the skinny. And yeah, we've been doing this partnership this is the third one. For us, it's really valuable because it brings in different voices, people who may not know how to approach writing first before. We do have a kind of pitching guide on our site, which I'll send you a link to in a bit, which is hopefully really useful in terms of lowering the barriers to entry, but I'm aware that it's a kind of ongoing process. It's a kind of constant process to make sure that people are aware of how to get involved and to put that in front of them. It also offers a bit of a space for more generalist writers. I think we are quite section specific when it comes to the pitching process. I'll go through the different sections and who the editors are in a little bit, but if you were trying to get in touch, our pitching guide says, go to the section editors, find which one you're interested in, get in touch with them. I think there certainly have been people who've come through this program in the past who were more like, well, I want to write about lots of things, or I want to write about identity and how it connects to film, but also how it connects to books. And it's like this is an opportunity for a more generalist approach, I think.
And it's surprising how rare that is, Roz, that's actually available on your website and people can actually like find out how to pitch to you and who to pitch it to and all those sorts of things. Like it's amazing how many publications don't make that transparent.
Yeah.
or lay it out in any way, which for the rest of the people in the room it can be really infuriating. So it's great that the skinny do that. But yes, you'll find not every publication is quite as open and transparent with that information. So yeah, you do have to go on a little run around the doors sometimes to work out how and who to pitch to.
It can be incredibly intimidating as a freelancer. I remember when I was first trying to just like get anything placed anywhere, and it was just you feel like no response is rejection, but no response might just be that it's the wrong person or their inbox is crazy or they just they're off, and haven't put on their autoresponder, or that it's gone this. But there's just like so many different reasons that someone might not respond. But if you're just trying to get the first thing written, and you are used to working within, I don't know, like a university or a school environment where you get feedback and your feedback is nothing, it can be really, really off-putting and kind of difficult to not internalize, I think.
Yeah, we were talking a bit earlier before we were on the call about what makes a good piece of arts journalism. Is there anything that you or kind of the skinny's always looking for in a piece, or is there a general approach, or is there? I know there's obviously lots of different approaches to all sorts of things. It's a very open-ended question, but yeah, I wondered if you had anything to add to that in terms of something that you guys like to see.
I appreciate a really particular perspective if it's well justified, and I think the well justified is somewhere that people can miss out. We had a piece last month that was making some really good points, but didn't actually evidence them, and that meant it felt slight, even though what it was talking about was not slight. What it was talking about was really important, but because it had this lack of evidence, we had to kind of go back and say, you need to just tell people why. I appreciate, like a really wide range of things. I think people who are able to deal with serious subjects in a witty way, I really like in terms of writers, because I think it's really good to take readers with you. Different strategies for taking readers with you, I think, is important to consider. You want it to be informed for sure. I want them to be knowledgeable. But when I say knowledgeable, I don't mean that you have to have a degree in this subject to be someone who knows about it. If you're a journalist, you should be able to do the research to know about something quite quickly, um you need to be able to kind of evidence each of the points you make and be able to kind of like cite it. But that doesn't need years of research, I would say, particularly at this point in time. And yeah, perspective really, and that perspective to be delivered fairly. I think it's really important to always remember that there is a person at the other side, a person or people at the other side of your piece of writing. I would say it was a mistake that I made when I first was doing reviewing, and was just like, someone's gonna hear what I say. I'm very excited about it, and didn't really consider that it's like, you know, there's a human being who put like a lot of work into that exhibition that you just said was rubbish. And they're probably quite upset actually. And why did you say it was rubbish? Just for your own personal issues, not because of actually the objective truth. And you know, there isn't it's important to also remember that there isn't necessarily an objective truth, you know, like the consumption of art is inherently subjective, and you are there to deliver to a reader or an audience your perspective, but also balance that with a more general perspective, if that makes sense. So it's not just, you know, even if you had a really terrible time at the comedy show because the person sitting next to you was really loud and annoying and like it ruined your experience, that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to tell a reader that the comedy show itself is bad, if that makes sense. It's about kind of balancing those two things.
Absolutely. Are there any other things that you really don't, you know, that are common mistakes that people make that you think, you know, that you're constantly having to come up against, or even if not constantly having to come up against, even if it's just once in a while, but it was kind of common mistakes that people make within a piece of writing that you go, oh, we're gonna have to, you know, you have to go back to them and say, actually, different approach needed here, or yeah.
Just trying to think back to the various disasters of the Fringe. We have, I think, people not doing enough sensitivity training on themselves can be an issue. You need to really think around the subject and understand what it is you're reviewing. And you need to be aware of who you're talking about, you know, like think about pronouns. If you don't know, ask. Think about the kind of like cultural context of things. Like we had a review of a show about the show was, I think it's called Partition. It was a Naim Wajani show, and the reviewer, like, we didn't publish it, but the reviewer had said like the partition of Afghanistan, which is like the most basic point of where this happened, and like you need to do that research. It's really important, because we need to trust you. We need to trust your understanding of the subject, I would say. So in terms of what we're going to be looking for articles, we run features, which are usually like 800 words long, and reviews, which are kind of 250 words. The features, if it's like a really in-depth topic, could be expanded to sort of 2 pages, which is more like 1500 words. Like, for example, it's a thematic approach, or there's multiple interviewees or something like that. I think what we're looking for in a piece of writing fundamentally is ideas, connecting with culture, connecting with accessible culture in terms of something connecting with an exhibition or a film release or something. But it can then go from there to a bigger question. So we're just planning a new issue at the moment. Because are we not always planning a new issue? The last one came out 3 days ago. And the sort of theme we're looking at is around radicalism and radical imagination, and a lot of things are connected by that at this point in time. So the whole magazine becomes like this sort of thematic base, but that could also be true within an article. So we could be, you know, you could pitch an idea for there are these 3 events happening this month, and they are in different cultural contexts. Like there's a books one, there's a film one, there's a music one, but they all have this underlying theme, and I want to explore how they're all connected, that kind of thing.
Roz, do you pick the theme based on what you've got, you've got coming in, or is it the other way around? You kind of pick a theme and then look for pitches that will respond to that theme. Sorry if
Uh,
that's the obvious
It's
question.
kind of both. It's quite a collective endeavor. So we have some themes which are not set in stone, but like planned in November of the previous year, and they are around the sort of cultural calendar. So we know that August is always going to be the Edinburgh Festival because they are inescapable. But then we have more kind of liminal themes. Like this month is more, it's come from like I think this time last year we did something similar, which was more around activism. Like the cover line was future tense, which incidentally then became the Edinburgh International Book Festival's entire theme. Feel like that's not a coincidence. Anyway, um, like you've seen that and forgotten you've seen that. um, so that was more of a liminal, like let's look about activism and futurology in a sense, and so that's kind of where we're at the moment, at this point in history and this point in the cultural calendar with like the radical book fair and things happening. So it's a bit more of a and actually once we've started looking at this as a theme, so many things fall within it, but it kind of means that the articles can be shaped in slightly different ways. So what would have been a straight up interview with a musician, for example, then becomes informed by the theme and becomes a more potentially more interesting conversation about kind of radicalism and how they want to plan for the future and that kind of thing. That answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Are there things in a pitch that would make it stand out for you, that would really pull you in?
A
We're going to talk about
combination
pitching in a
of
minute, but yeah.
a combination of brevity and detail, I would say.
Okay.
Very fine
Easy enough.
balance. Um, like you know, a good pitch could be like one sentence long if it's just convincing and written in a way where you just trust that the person knows exactly what they're going to talk about. I mean, that pitch would then be a conversation afterwards where you go back and say, and what threads are you going to explore within this, and what's your kind of evidentiary base going to be, and who are you going to talk to, and all that kind of stuff. But it could just be one very convincing sentence about like here's the cultural context of what I want to talk about. Here's what it links in with for the timeliness of it. So yeah, like context, timeliness, what actual piece of work it's going to be talking to, who you perceive you might be talking to. So that kind of level of detail, but like no more than a paragraph, I would say. Because once you go beyond a paragraph, you're basically approaching the side of some of the articles.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Cool. That's anything else? Any other little I don't know, shortcuts? Are there any shortcuts, sort of shorthand that make you think? Not TT's face then.
No one
I
knows shorthand.
shorthand for little things that you can add to a pitch that might sort of get it over the line.
Links to previous works, really important. Potentially a diverse array of work, so like a feature, a review, maybe tonal shifts, maybe subject shifts, just depending on what it is. And I think you know people's inboxes are insane. Mine's like I get 200 emails a day. It's very easy for me to miss something, so a follow-up email is a really good idea, I would say, if you don't hear from someone within like a week or something.
Yeah. Before we move for I was just reading TT's comment. And before we move to any audience questions for Roz, I wonder, TT or Colin, do either of you have anything you would like to ask Roz in relation to anything she said? But also the rest of you do start getting your questions into the comments box, or raise your hand if you would like to ask a question.
Strong agree in shorthand.
I've got a question from Carol. Oh no, from Bethany. Sorry. I'm turning in for Mom, Kavina Pound, and we Danceability from Greenwich, and in a group called Freestylers at. Wait,
Siobhan,
maybe that's not a question.
not quite a question.
Not a question. Cool. Thanks for letting us know. Well, I'll preach with a question, but it's, I guess, like, do you have a process around like almost like the sensitivities? When do you feel, or what are some things that you make sure to feel confident that? I mean, I guess the Afghanistan example is really out there, but I guess there's maybe more intricate bits where it's a bit harder to tell if something is sensitive to like the cultural context that is discussed, or specific identities that are discussed.
Try and find someone whose lived experience that is to check it, or just ask them questions to check it. And I mean, ideally, the person writing it would have the cultural identity to start with, or at least experience of the cultural identity to start it with. Like, we really try to avoid people with. I mean, the Afghanistan one was the partition one was just like, I don't know how that happened. We would try to avoid that situation where you have someone who's just like completely disassociated from the cultural context commenting on it, because that's not. It's not. You want the reader to be informed by the writing, and the best way to be informed by the writing is for the person to know a lot about it to start with.
Someone in the chat, the person who's just a string of numbers, has asked, what are the timelines in terms of pitches?
So we're currently working on a November issue, and ideally we would probably have had pitches start to come in like a month or so ago. Like, it's not, something could still come in and be relevant for the November issue, don't get me wrong, but in terms of this like planning, it's good to have like a month and a half maybe before the actual print date to consider it and see how it fits in with other things.
I think something else to say about timeliness is also when something has happened in the media, when there's been like a key event that has created a lot of interest, then putting a pitch in that talks about those issues can be a very attractive thing. It has to be quick.
Yeah.
When something comes along that is of the moment, as it were.
Yeah, how do you guys deal with that, with it being a print publication where you're kind of commissioning that far in advance?
We also have online first content.
Yeah.
So if for example someone's pitched something around multi-year funding being delayed today, that is a timely thing, which would make sense. So we have a variety of things. Sometimes there will be a kind of cultural hook in the news that someone will pitch a piece about, like something to do with, I don't know, a celebrity does something, and then it's like, well, what if I went and reappraised their body of work? And you do that piece, and it's good for web at that point because of clicks, etc. But it could also then work in a later publication because there's a timeliness to the piece. In terms of our news stuff, it's mainly done in-house, but there have been instances of people pitching news pieces and just having like a really particular insight and understanding of how to make that story work. Then we would commission that rather than going in-house.
And Rebecca asks, Roz, you talked about diversity of work. Is that diversity of the writer's portfolio?
Yeah, I mean diversity in the sense of different types of articles, different types of topics. So, a review piece, a feature piece, an opinion piece, perhaps, like talking about music, talking about film. Like, you don't have to have that. I mean, if you're only interested in film, then you can just write about film. But it can be good to see a variety, to just see how you respond to different topics and different contexts.
Lovely, thanks for that. Anyone else? Any more questions for Roz? Because I know that Roz has to go quite soon.
Childcare is calling.
Yeah, childcare calls in 2 minutes. So now if I have a hold you.
Carol says, can we post about our work in a book or film from Beth? Oh, from Beth, not from Carol, I assume.
Do you mean, can we write about work which you've done in a book or a film, or
expand, please? We don't know.
Or do you mean, could a work then be republished elsewhere?
Yes, yes, yes. I think that is what Carol is talking about. I could respond to that to say that that's exactly what Disability Arts Online's blog platform is for. It's a space within our online journal that artists can post about their own work in a way that connects with the community of disabled artists that engage with Disability Arts Online. So it's kind of different from the kind of editorial role that Disability Arts Online plays.
Rebecca's Rebecca, I don't know if you're asking if you can voice your question, which you're absolutely
yes, I was, yeah. I'm still a bit confused when you were talking about portfolio. Are you basically saying that you would prefer somebody pitched different formats, so a review or I don't know, a long form article, or are you saying it that it's about what work they've previously done? And the reason I'm asking that is if you haven't got a huge portfolio, you know, that's one of the things that I'm always concerned about, that I'll pitch something and someone will go, well, you haven't written much, so, you know, we're not gonna commission you because, you know.
Just one piece is absolutely sufficient. It can be good to get more of an idea of someone's, if you've got a massive portfolio, then it's good to have examples of different things. But we would just be looking for you to pitch the specific article type you wanted to write. So that's part of the consideration around the pitches. I think this would be a feature which is this long, I mean, like 1 page long, and here's a link to just one other thing that you've written is absolutely enough.
Great, thank you.
Nice.
Thanks for that, Rebecca. Roz, I'm aware you need to leave us, so thank you so much for your time. And yeah, thanks to Roz.
Thanks for having me. Good to meet you all.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye. Colin, over to you to talk a little bit about what we look for at DAO before we move on to pitching.
Yeah, sure. Actually, kind of responding to that, Rebecca, and to Carol there, I think it'd be helpful perhaps to say that the reason why Disability Arts Online has a kind of a blog platform to it is to kind of flex that muscle, that writing muscle. It's a place to you know, to try things out and to find what fits, and to get kind of peer feedback from the community of artists that engage with Disability Arts Online. That's it's a key aspect of what we do, because Disability Arts Online has been going for 20 years now, but its primary focus has always been to support emerging artists, and in the very beginning, disabled artists work wasn't written about media at all. And so it was the original remit was really around being a shared space for critique and connection that allowed for artists to have a platform that they could refer to in writing funding applications or in writing for opportunity, in applying for opportunities. It's, I guess, like Ros was saying, in a way, when you're pitching to write for a platform, that it's useful to have a piece of writing, at least one thing that has been published previously, to kind of give, or it could be something that you send as an attachment. Actually, it doesn't need to have been published, to give the editor a sense of the your writing tone, of your style. I think for Disability Arts Online, there are kind of various key things that we're looking for, and Ros spoke about enthusiasm and passion for the subject and the importance of research. And I think that is also very key for Disability Arts Online. It's not that you have to know everything about who it is or what it is that you're writing about. It's it's the enthusiasm that's important. So in your pitch, for example, you could say that you want to write about the thing, whatever it is, because you want to understand it more. That kind of honesty is really useful in the pitch. Disability Arts Online is very much founded on the social model of disability. And so another key reason for us kind of having set up in the first place is to challenge narratives around disability that focus on tragedy or pity or focus on the kind of medical model. We're keen that the lived experience of disability is something that informs work that's written about. It might be that the artist or the work indeed isn't sort of, it can be very nuanced. It doesn't have to be that the artist you want to write about identifies as a disabled person even, but it could be that if you have a disability reading that comes from your own lived experience, that it speaks to you in some way, that could be very very valuable. We realize it's writing around disability, there's a very delicate balance, because impairment issues can make life difficult of themselves. However, challenging those medical model stereotypes is really at the foundation of what we do. So it's important to us that there's focus on the art, but there's that sort of other understanding of identity as well at the core of what we're looking for. It's also really important to us that the sort of having been involved myself in disability arts for a number of decades, the lack of intersectionality within disability arts has been something that we've been keenly want to challenge, and intersectional approaches, how disability intersects with other aspects of identity, and how that informs a piece of work or an artist's work. That kind of nuance of lived experience is something that that we're very keen to publish more of on disability arts online. So art that says something about social equality in relation to how race, sexuality, gender, class issues interact with disability, that's all really important to us. Yeah, Rebecca's asked, what does intersectionality mean? And it is that different aspects of who we are as human beings. So it's always been very apparent to me that if you've got lived experience of racism and also of disability, it can make that sense of being marginalized and being other kind of doubly, triply difficult to navigate. And it's those kind of pithy issues are something that we're keen to put writing and understanding of those issues, something that we're keen to publish. Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions for Colin as well? Please do either, again, get them in the chat, or use the raise hand function, or just shout up and we'll hear from you. And we are going to come on. So if we're about to segue into talking about pitching specifically and what we mean by pitching. So we will talk about that in a minute, but I do think just to give you all another minute or so, just if you would like to ask Colin questions specifically about.
I have a question for Colin.
Go for it.
Sort of talk about sometimes the elephant in the room. Do your contributors get paid for disability arts online, and does that include like the blog section?
We have in our about page, we have the sliding scale of payment of fees that we pay for editorial, reviews and interviews and showcases and comment pieces, and we it's always been really important to us to pay artists who contribute, who write for us. That doesn't, however, include the blog section of the website, because the blog section is more open. It's there for people to use to practice in a sense, or to showcase their own artistic practice in a way to attract opportunities in a different way. It was evident to me sort of from quite early on that the blog platform served an important place to give disabled artists a voice, and that those blogs were being picked up on by other organizations who were then coming to those artists, and so it was creating opportunities in a different way, although people weren't getting paid to write and to publish on the blog section.
Yeah, I think it's kind of important to say, so we don't, in a sense, we don't really gatekeep the blogs. So whilst you have to kind of contact us if you want. If you're interested in blogging, we will have a conversation about the kinds of topics you might like to blog about, or those kind of things. We very lightly proof the blog, so just to make sure there's nothing offensive in there, and do sort of minor corrections of proofing and things like that. But we don't like editorialize them. We wouldn't massively change them wholesale unless there was a really, really good reason. And we don't there's no, you don't have to come to us and tell us what your idea for a specific blog is. It's just, you kind of go with what's on your mind at that moment. Whereas with the magazine, it's much more, there's a more formal process where you'd put forward an idea for an article. We would then say if we want to take it forward, and then in that instance, then we do pay an average of about £150 per article is our sort of average rate. But it's a sliding scale between about 120 to 160, depending on the piece. Yeah, so that's that. Any other questions for Colin before we move on to pitching specifically? We can always come back as well. Just going to put on terp switch, and then I will and then I'll go back into the slides of pitching.
So just as a forewarning, we're going to ask you to contribute again. So think about what you think makes a good pitch and get ready to put it into the chat, or as said before, please feel free to voice things too. Thank you, Kate. Just put the question into the chat as well.
So just briefly,
oh, sorry.
Some of you might have been thinking, what is a pitch? We've mentioned it a few times already in the session. And we could have started by talking about pitching, to be fair. But pitches are really how the industry runs for the most part. Like I think I said earlier, staff writing jobs are really, really rare now. So the majority of publications, the majority of things that they publish will have started with a pitch. So a pitch is just an idea for an article or a piece of content. That's what we mean by a pitch. It usually takes the shape of a short email. Actually, based on what Roz was saying, that's probably on the high side for the skinny. She said, for them anyway, she sort of said it could even be a sentence. I think for us, we probably want a bit more than a sentence. But a few sentences, or one good paragraph is probably about right. So that's how you do it. You nearly always pitch via email, unless for whatever reason you get to a face-to-face with an editor and you come to them directly with an idea. Most likely they'd still want you to follow it up with an email. And why do we do pitches? It's basically about quickly grabbing the attention of the editor without sending a finished piece. It's quite important that you generally don't send a finished piece. We, as Disability Arts Online, very occasionally do accept unsolicited sort of full articles that will sometimes publish wholesale, but that's quite rare. Most publications don't. And also you kind of don't know what they're going to do with it if you send them a full finished piece. You're giving it all away. You're giving it on a plate. But for the most part, it's also a lot to do with the fact, they haven't always got time to read a full article. As Roz said, editors' inboxes are very busy places. I can certainly vouch for that as well, and I'm sure Colin can. So that's what we mean by a pitch, essentially. Now, thinking about what we talked about earlier in terms of what makes a good piece of work, then some of the ingredients are going to be the same, but we'd also love you to have a little think about what it is that might make a good pitch. Certainly, Roz alluded to some of the things that they're looking for. Yeah, but we'd just like you to have a think, maybe take a minute or two to have a think about what a good pitch email might contain, and put your thoughts in the chat, and we'll kind of have a little discussion and think about it. And I'm going to take the slide off just because although someone did ask earlier if we could put the questions in the chat. So the question is, what makes a good pitch? just in case you can't see it on the screen. And then I'm going to turn that slide off just so we're not too distracted by the slide.
And Joe, Rachel has put a good picture saying why you think the proposed piece of writing is important. What's the point and why people should care about what you're pitching? I think that kind of enthusiasm and passion for the subject is really important. It's quite difficult to kind of put that in few words, to express that in a few words, but that's the essence of what makes a good pitch, really.
Thank you, Naomi. Also added to add to Rachel's that you care about the idea, that you're intrigued and enthusiastic about what you want to investigate or talk about. So actually show like why you should be the person to write this piece. Yeah, that's really important as well. Yeah.
I think that's also where lived experience can be really valuable, and especially, you know, with platforms like Disability Arts Online and the Skinny, where you know, kind of identity is quite paramount to why we exist, to what we're doing in relation to the arts.
Other ones, I feel like there's so many good points alluded to by both what Colin and what Ross said earlier. So I always feel like it's like a quiz of memory rather than it. But yeah, any other thoughts that you think make a good pitch, or maybe even questions about pitching? We have space for that.
Yeah, absolutely, we do. Think about as well, like as we alluded to it, like as we said earlier, editors' inboxes are very busy. So like think about what are the ways that you might make a pitch stand out. That's maybe another prompt of like how are you gonna make yours stand out from a crowd of emails. Don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that, but starting with, so just starting like a start of a 10 on that, like your subject line is important. Like if your subject line's not descriptive of what it is, if it's very generic, then it's likely to get lost in the mess. For me, I really like a pitch, the subject line of a pitch personally, as someone reading them, I like it to contain the word pitch, so I'm really clear that's what it is. But it's a pitch, and it's not, you know, it's not a press person getting in touch with me. It's a journalist pitching an idea to me. That's really, really clear to me straight away by just starting the subject line with the word pitch, colon, something that describes what your pitch is in a very short amount of words. Like we were talking about earlier, like the importance of titles. If you think about the title of your pitch as almost being a little bit like the title of what the article might be, but something that's going to straight away make me go, I know what this is. I want to read more about what it could be. And Kate's just said, as the reader of the inbox, that's exactly what I was about. Yes, because we do get, you know, and every editorial inbox will be the same. We get inundated with stuff from PR, basically from press people, press releases, people trying to promote their own work, which is fine, and we go through all of that. We process all of those because there's sometimes great stuff in there, but we consider a pitch that someone's considered and has already come up with the idea and is coming with that thing to bring to us a little bit differently. It's much more likely to catch our attention than a press company trying to promote their tour. And I would hazard a guess that that's the same across a lot of the industry.
I guess another thing to think about is how you can show your expertise or your past work. So we mentioned that quite a lot before, but I guess like picking a piece that you're really proud of to showcase your work, and that if you're really just starting off, it doesn't have to be publishing. You can attach it, or you can link to a blog or something that is a bit more informal but really shows off your skill. That's really fine. And I guess the other thing that I was thinking about is like be really clear the format of your pitch, so like what it looks like that you want to write, and it doesn't have to be the same as the thing that you use as the thing that you use to show what your writing is like. Those can be quite different things if it still feels like a supportive piece or like making your case as the journalist that you are.
Absolutely. Can you think of an example of a pitch email you received that did catch your attention? We've kind of got to be a little bit careful in kind of sharing specific details, I guess. The ones that usually catch our attention are things that put an opinion across that maybe we haven't considered before, or that just feels really topical or of the moment. We had a pitch actually from one of the previous cohorts of the Diverse Critics program in the last program that was basically all about it was about the problem with trigger warnings, basically. And that caught my attention straight away as just being like, oh yeah, I can. This is a juicy topic, and they'd framed it in such a way that it was kind of clear that they were taking a slightly different position than a lot of the positions you might hear about it. That's one example. I think it's maybe slightly I think the other thing that I quite like sometimes is you might use, especially if you're going for something that's quite topical, you might use like a shocking statistic or a particular quote that like sums up that thing, but that is like going to grab your attention. If we're talking about funding again, if it's like a huge slashing of particular types of funding and what impacts that's going to have for artists at the very bottom or for emerging artists, that kind of thing, that eye-grabbing statistic instantly is going to grab my attention. It's also going to go, okay, this person's thought about the topic, they've researched it, they've actually pulled out something, and it's a really pithy way, as Roz was kind of alluding to earlier, like something you can do that doesn't take up very much room at all in your pitch, but it kind of instantly shows that you've done a bit of research, but it's also doing that kind of attention-grabbing thing. Yeah, any more? Good question, though.
Kate says, especially with reviews, being clear of dates that you could deliver the work for, as reviews are quite time sensitive.
Yeah.
I think it's very helpful in the pitch to be clear, to have the kind of basic details, the who, what, why, where, and when, kind of laid out. That's so who it is that you're going to write about, what the piece is, where it's happening, why you're the right person to review it, and as Kate says, when it's happening. It's really important.
Yeah, I think that not always, we do publish evergreen content that is actually some of the best performing pieces on disability arts online are things that have stood the test of time and that people actually return to, so that you can absolutely pitch that kind of stuff that you think even in 5 years' time this is going to be a relevant topic. But for the most part, a lot of the sort of pitching cycle, especially within most of the sort of journalism industry, is people are looking for something topical or of the moment. For the most part, it does depend obviously on the publication and the type of thing that you're writing about. But so if you can get something that does feel topical, it's tapping into something that's a bit of a zeitgeist at the moment, or it can be something that's already been in the news or talked about quite a lot, provided you're bringing something fresh to it. It's a different take on this. It's a hot take on some other issue that might have been burning on for quite a while. But that's quite a good approach, as like I think flipping the script on things is like quite a nice way to come up with ideas for pitches, like going, oh, let's turn this on its head. What's the contrarian view on like the thing that you're hearing all the time about a particular topic? Hopefully not contrarian just for the sake of being so.
What's the view that's been left out, or what
Yeah,
what issues that people have not been talking about? Because
absolutely. And especially if you especially if that's then informed by a lived experience type thing, where it's like, well, this perspective hasn't been considered, then you're like, okay, this is like really unique. This person's bringing their lived experience to back it up. Like that is so appealing to an editor, certainly to us as editors. I think a big one that most people probably don't think about, or probably the biggest mistake people make with pitches, actually, I think, is that they do a generic pitch for an idea and don't think about the publication that they're pitching it to. So I would always say, I've always had the most success when I've been pitching, and I like to read it when I'm an editor, when you've really thought about that publication, maybe even that editor, or at least that section, and you tailored it to the types of content that they already make, or you can literally reference something that they've already published and you're giving us a counterpoint to that, or you're demonstrating knowledge of their publication already. Like straight away, if you're a new writer to them and they've never worked with you before, being able to demonstrate the fact that you're really familiar with their output and you know what that's going to kind of tell them that you kind of know what they expect a bit, and you're going to know how to appeal to their audiences, even if it is bringing a new angle. I think if you're going in pitching to a publication and you've never read anything on that publication before, like you're kind of firing with the lights off a bit there. You should do a bit. You do want to do that research and tailor it. Yeah, if you can name the person and it's the right name, even better.
yeah,
Not always possible. Not always possible, unfortunately, because as we said earlier, some publications just aren't that upfront about who they are. Oh, we're at time. I can't believe it. It's 4 o'clock. Okay.
One last thing that I'd quite like to say that I meant to say earlier that kind of relates to pitching is kind of it also relates to the history of disability arts. Is that we do have we cover all of the arts, but kind of historically, theatre is the place where disability arts has been most successful in kind of engaging the gatekeepers. So in the last few years, particularly, we've focused a lot more on the visual arts because we recognize that is the arts where disability is still very much kind of relegated to the sort of community space in the gallery rather than the main space. So yeah, just wanted to put that in there.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to need to wrap very, very soon. So whilst we do, a couple of things. First of all, thanks everyone for joining us. And thanks to our interpreters and our captioners, of course, and our lovely deliverers. But we're going to put a link to a feedback form in the chat. Really help us if you can fill it in. We'll also be sending that out in an email to everyone who signed up. So just to reiterate, that really, really helps us with telling our funders why what we do is important. And it also helps us improve. If you've got feedback about how we could do this better, then that's always really valuable. So yeah, if you would take 5 minutes out of your day to give us some feedback on the webinar, that would be amazing. I think the link for that is in the chat.
Thanks everyone for joining us today. It's been very enjoyable.